I'm Mara Jennings, 34, a paralegal and single mother. The courtroom's cold air didn't match the sweat under my collar. I sat 3 rows back from the front, tucked behind a pillar like I didn't belong in my own story. Beige walls, humming fluorescents. That sharp disinfectant smell mingled with old paper. Everything about this place felt like someone else's life, someone else's pain. Mine was never supposed to make it here. I held the envelope in my lap. Inside it, 6 months of recordings. My voice. His voice. The silence between blows. A plastic evidence sleeve barely thicker than a birthday card, but heavy as a brick. Mara Jennings. A sharp voice from the clerk's bench pierced the white noise. I rose, heart thumping in a staccato beat against my ribcage, and walked slowly toward the barrier gate. The bailiff didn't move to open it for me. His eyes passed over me like fog on glass. I reached out to open it myself, but his arm came down suddenly. "Family only," he muttered without looking at me. "We're trying to keep the front row clear for those directly involved." I swallowed the insult. Directly involved. As if he didn't know. As if the bruises, the late-night ER visits, the silent reports I filed through shaking fingers, didn't count. "I am family," I said. "I'm his wife." The words tasted like rust. He looked at me then, registering the flatness in my voice. His hand twitched off the wooden bar, but not fast enough to erase the damage. Someone behind me coughed. Someone else chuckled. Across the aisle. His sister, her perfect hair twisted in a smug French knot, leaned in to whisper something to their mother. I didn't have to hear it to feel it. I'd heard versions of it at every birthday, every barbecue, every school pickup where he showed up late and I had to explain the bruises under my daughter's cardigan sleeves. They thought I was dramatic, sensitive, hysterical. The difficult one. "You know how Mara is," they'd say. "Always with the stories. If you've ever had to prove your pain while someone else wore a mask of charm in public, drop a comment or let me know where you're watching from. Hit like or subscribe if family drama ever made you feel invisible too." I stood there, suspended, holding the envelope like a fool, clinging to a dream that had already bled out. But then a door opened in the back of the courtroom, and everything shifted. "Your Honor," the court officer said, addressing the judge directly. "Ms. Jennings has filed an evidentiary motion under Section 372B of the Domestic Proceedings Code. It includes audio submitted with chain of custody certification." Everyone turned. The judge looked over her glasses, down at me. "Is Ms. Jennings present?" "I am," I said, steadying my voice. "Right here." For a moment, there was nothing but the sound of paper shuffling. Then the judge nodded. "Bring her forward." The bailiff stepped aside. His arm now an apology, he wouldn't speak aloud. I walked past the smirks, the stares, the judgment that had clung to me like second skin for years. I walked all the way to the front, past the polished shoes of attorneys who didn't know my name last month, and handed the envelope directly to the clerk. As the file was passed up to the bench, the air changed. It was subtle, like someone had cracked a window in a sealed house. A new tension slithered in, one that didn't belong to me this time. The judge pressed play. His voice came out first, low and unmistakably sharp. "Don't make me teach you again, Mara." Then silence. Then the unmistakable slap. My voice, barely above a whisper. "Please stop." Another slap. A door slammed. The sound of something breaking. People in the courtroom froze. I felt their breath catch. Gasps. One juror covered her mouth. A woman in the third pew whispered, "Oh my God." His sister's arms dropped from their neatly folded position. Their mother clutched her purse with white knuckles. I didn't move. I didn't cry. I just stood there, as still as the silence that followed the last recording. The silence that wrapped around the room when the judge stopped the audio and looked up. Her mouth slightly parted in something like horror or maybe regret. That was the moment. When everything stopped. When the weight shifted. When they finally looked at me. And this time, they saw me. I didn't look at him. Not when they called recess. Not when his lawyer leaned in to whisper with tight urgency. Not when the bailiff finally offered me a seat like I belonged there all along. I sat down slowly, hands clenched in my lap. My fingers ached from gripping the envelope for so long, though it was gone now. The paper still held the shape of my hands, like the tension had been branded into it. I stared forward. The judge's bench, the microphones, the water pitcher with its beads of condensation. I anchored myself in those small details. It was safer than looking around. I didn't need to see their faces. I could feel them. The disbelief, the awkward shifting, the murmurs no longer just about me, but about him. I knew this feeling. Not victory, just the first flicker of validation, the kind that didn't erase what came before, but whispered maybe, just maybe. I hadn't imagined all of it, that I wasn't broken for breaking. It took 3 more hours before the judge reconvened. During that time, I sat with my attorney, Marla, in the hallway. She didn't ask me many questions. She didn't need to. Instead, she said this: "You waited a long time to be heard." I nodded. I didn't even know I was waiting. I just wanted it to stop. Marla didn't say anything to that. She just tapped her pen gently against the edge of her notebook, like she was counting something only she understood. "You still want to speak?" she asked. I paused. I felt my throat tighten, that familiar fear rising again. What if they still don't believe me? What if he twists it again? Makes it sound like I provoked it, like I made him act that way. But then I remembered the sound of my voice on that recording. Not angry, not vengeful, just begging. "Yes," I said. "I need to." When we returned to the courtroom, the atmosphere had changed. It was less a room of certainty now, and more like the moment after a storm, everything still intact, but not untouched. He wouldn't look at me either. He kept his head down, flipping through papers that didn't matter anymore. The judge allowed me to take the stand. I walked up slowly. My legs trembled slightly, not out of fear anymore, but because I'd never spoken my story in full sentences before. Only fragments, whispers to friends, short blurts at the doctor's office, cryptic notes in a journal. This was different. The clerk swore me in. I raised my hand, said the words. My voice didn't shake. Marla stood. "Please state your name and relationship to the defendant, Mara Jennings. I'm his wife. We've been married 8 years. How long have you been documenting what occurred in your home?" "About 6 months," I replied, but it started long before that. "Can you describe what it is?" I looked at the judge, then at the microphone, then down at my lap. "It's hard to give it a name," I said, "because when you live inside it, it doesn't feel like abuse. It feels like you're wrong all the time, like you're too emotional, too sensitive, like everything is your fault." I paused. I let the silence stretch, not out of drama, but because I wanted to breathe. He didn't hit me every day. That's not how it worked. Sometimes it was a bad look in front of our daughter, or throwing something near me, or pretending I was invisible for days, or telling his family I was unstable. More silence. But other times, it was worse. There were bruises. There were nights I had to ice my ribs while lying about falling down the stairs. There were mornings I couldn't open my jaw all the way, but still had to make lunch for our daughter like everything was normal. Marla asked, "Why didn't you leave?" I smiled, a bitter twitch. The question wasn't cruel, it was honest. I thought I couldn't survive without him. I said, He made sure I thought that no one would believe me, that I'd be alone, that I'd be the one they whispered about at family events. Someone sniffled in the back. I didn't turn around. Did you ever tell anyone I tried? I said. I told his sister once, after he shoved me during a Christmas party and I locked myself in the bathroom. She laughed, said I was just being dramatic, said he was passionate. Marla nodded gently. So you started recording? Yes. I hid my phone. I captured it. I built proof because my own words weren't enough. She looked at the judge. No further questions. Then it was his attorney's turn. He was younger than I expected. Probably still believed in clean wins and clever phrasing. He walked up slowly. Face unreadable. Mrs. Jennings, he began. You said you stayed for your daughter. But don't you think exposing her to these recordings, or to this trial, could be even more damaging? I blinked. No, I said. What damages a child more is watching one parent hurt another while everyone else pretends not to see. He shifted. Tried again. Were there ever moments you said things in anger? Times you pushed back, times you provoked him? There it was. The question that always came, the secret trapdoor in every courtroom, every dinner table, every casual conversation about abuse. I answered it calmly. Yes, I'm human. I cried. I shouted. I begged. But I didn't cause what he did, and nothing I ever said justified what he did. I turned, finally, and looked at the jury. No one deserves to live in fear inside their own home. The defense attorney hesitated, then sat down. The judge called for a break. When I returned to my seat, a woman from the jury box watched me with a look I couldn't quite name. It wasn't pity. It wasn't judgment. It was closer to recognition, like she'd walked that same tightrope once, in shoes that never quite fit. That was the first time I let myself exhale. I felt something shift again, not in the room, in me. I didn't sleep that night, even after court adjourned. After the files were sealed and I was told to rest. The silence in my apartment didn't feel safe. It felt like an echo chamber of everything I'd just let out. My daughter, Ellie, slept in her room with her stuffed rabbit tucked under her chin, blissfully unaware that her mother had just torn open a wound in public. I sat at the kitchen table in the dark, nursing cold tea, staring at the file folder Marla had given me earlier. It contained copies of transcripts, affidavits, expert witness options, legal paperwork that looked sterile on the outside but held pieces of my life on every page. I ran my fingers over the thick manila edge, and I remembered. The first time. It had been small. Isn't it always a slammed door? A cruel joke delivered too close to the truth. I had made lasagna for dinner. He said it tasted like wet cardboard. And when I didn't laugh, he threw the plate against the wall. I apologized. I cleaned it up. I told Ellie it was an accident. He brought flowers the next day. Tulips. He didn't even know they were my least favorite. I told myself not to be ungrateful. There were 100 of those moments before it ever got physical. Each one a thread pulled from the hem of who I used to be. I didn't realize I was unraveling until there wasn't enough left to keep myself warm. By the time he shoved me in the hallway while Ellie was brushing her teeth, I didn't even cry. I just waited for it to be over. People think abuse is about violence. They don't understand how quiet it can be, how it wears your name away. Marla called the next morning. They're trying to file a motion to exclude the recordings, she said. On what grounds, I asked. Already knowing. Consent, she replied. His lawyer's arguing that you violated his privacy by recording without his knowledge. I let out a bitter laugh. Of course, it's not the bruises that are illegal. It's proving them. We'll fight it, Marla said firmly. We've already filed under the state's one-party consent laws, but we need to prep just in case. Okay, I said, my voice hollow. Tell me what you need. She paused. We need a witness. Someone who saw something, heard something, someone who'll speak up. I thought of his sister, of his mother, of our neighbors who looked the other way when shouting filtered through thin apartment walls. No one will, I said. They never do. But I was wrong. Later that afternoon, I got a call from a blocked number. I almost didn't pick up. Something told me to. Hello. A pause. A breath. Mara. I froze. It was Lila, his cousin, the one who came over that one summer to stay for a few weeks while she interned nearby. I heard about the trial, she said quietly. I saw something. A few times, actually. I felt my throat tighten. What did you see? She hesitated. Once, I was in the kitchen, and you were crying in the bathroom. He stood outside the door, banging on it, screaming. He didn't know I was home. I hid. My fingers gripped the phone tighter. I didn't say anything. She said, I didn't know what to do, but I kept thinking about it, over and over, and then I heard the recording in court. She took a shaky breath. If you need someone, I'll testify. I didn't respond right away. I just stood there in my kitchen, hand over my mouth, eyes burning. I whispered, Thank you. Lila's voice cracked. I'm sorry I didn't say something sooner. You're saying it now. I replied. That's enough. 2 days later, she sat in the witness box, hands trembling but voice strong. The courtroom was fuller this time. Word had spread. Something about the recordings, about the shift in narrative. People were suddenly interested. It was sickening, in a way, how quickly pain becomes entertainment. But I didn't care anymore. Let them watch. Let them hear it all. Lila recounted what she saw, what she heard. The silence in the courtroom deepened with every word. His lawyer didn't even bother trying to discredit her. After that, Marla called for a short recess. We met in the hallway again. You're doing good, she said. But they'll call him to the stand tomorrow. You ready for that? I didn't answer. I just nodded. But that night, I barely slept again. Ellie came into my room around 3 a.m., dragging her blanket behind her. Can I sleep with you? She whispered. I moved over and pulled her close. Her tiny body curled against mine like a secret I'd never let go of. Did I do something wrong? She asked suddenly. In the dark? No, I whispered back. Why would you think that? Because Daddy was mad a lot, she said. And sometimes I thought maybe it was because of me. My heart shattered. I cupped her face in my hands and kissed her forehead. It was never because of you, I said. Not once. Not ever. She didn't respond. She just nestled deeper into me. That was the moment I knew. No matter what happened in court, whether he was convicted or not, this was why I came forward. Not for revenge, not for attention, but so Ellie would know she wasn't crazy. That love wasn't supposed to hurt. That silence wasn't safety. And that her mother didn't disappear. I was still here, still standing. And tomorrow, I would look him in the eye, not as his wife, not as a victim, but as someone who finally had her voice back. The courtroom was colder the next day. Or maybe it was just me. I wore a navy blue dress with sleeves down to my wrists. Not because I was hiding anything anymore, just because I wanted to feel covered, protected. I had spent so many years feeling exposed, picked apart. I wanted to be whole for this. Ellie stayed home with a friend. I didn't want her anywhere near that room. When I arrived, people were already seated. The bailiff gave me a curt nod. No hesitation this time. Marla met me at the front with a look that said, Stay grounded, no matter what he says. He was already on the stand. He wore a gray suit, No tie. Hair slicked back like always. He looked smaller than I remembered. Or maybe he had always been that size, and I had just seen him as larger because of what he took from me. The oath was administered. His voice didn't shake. Then the questions began. His attorney asked the usual. His profession, our relationship history, the timeline of events. He kept it clean, distanced. He said things like Mara and I had communication issues, and we had disagreements, like any couple. When asked about the recordings, he said, they were taken out of context. Then he said, sometimes Mara would provoke arguments. I never meant to frighten her. I clenched my jaw. Marla leaned in and whispered, don't react. Let him keep talking. He did. He said I was emotionally unstable, that I struggled with anxiety, that he tried to help, but she made it impossible. He painted himself as patient, exhausted, concerned. He even said, I think Mara genuinely believes I hurt her, but I think a lot of it is projection. I stared straight ahead. I didn't blink. Then it was Marla's turn. She stood slowly, holding a single notepad. No papers, no theatrics. Mr. Jennings, she said calmly, do you deny that the voice in the recordings is yours? He paused. No. You admit those statements. Don't make me teach you again, and you know what happens when you talk back. Were spoken by you. He shifted. I was angry. Things get said during arguments. Marla nodded. Were you aware that your daughter, Ellie, was present during any of these incidents? I don't recall. She turned to the judge. Permission to play an additional segment of the recording. The judge nodded. A different clip played. In it, Ellie could be heard crying faintly in the background. Then his voice, sharp and booming. Go back to your room. Now. Then my voice. Please, don't raise your voice at her. She's scared. Then a crash. The courtroom went completely still. When the audio stopped, Marla walked closer to the stand. Do you remember that night? She asked. He didn't answer. She repeated, Mr. Jennings, do you remember that night? His jaw twitched. I don't recall every detail. Marla's voice softened. Let me ask you this. Then, do you believe Ellie felt safe in your home? He looked over at the jury. For a moment, I thought he might cry, but nothing came. I did my best. He said. That was the end of it. The judge recessed for lunch. Marla and I sat on a bench outside, her legs crossed. My hands curled around a paper cup of black coffee I didn't drink. How do you think it went? I asked. She glanced sideways. He's unraveling. But don't expect fireworks. This isn't about drama. It's about doubt. And you've cleared it. I nodded, then stared out the window at the parking lot. A woman approached us, late 50s, glasses, cardigan, soft voice. Ms. Jennings, she asked. Yes, I'm the court-appointed child advocate, she said, extending her hand. I met with Ellie last month. I just wanted to say, she's an extraordinary little girl. I felt a lump in my throat. She told me about a game you play. The woman added, you call it the safe list. She names things that make her feel safe. She said, Mommy is always on it. I covered my mouth with my hand. Thank you. I whispered. After lunch, closing statements began. His lawyer argued that yes, mistakes were made, but they didn't amount to systemic abuse, that no police reports were ever filed, that he had no prior record, that character witnesses had described him as a devoted father. Marla stood calmly, then delivered words I'd waited years to hear someone else say. This isn't about isolated incidents. It's about a pattern, a climate of fear, a house where silence replaced safety, where a woman collected proof, because no one would believe her otherwise. She turned to the jury. And now, you've heard it. No dramatics. No tears. Just truth. The judge dismissed us to await the ruling. Outside, the air smelled like rain on asphalt. I sat in my car with the windows down, not ready to drive home yet. I watched people leave the courthouse, walking back to lives that hadn't been cracked open on a public record. My phone buzzed. A text from my neighbor, Clara. Saw the news. I'm sorry I didn't check in sooner. We all heard things. We just didn't know what to say. If you need anything, I'm here. I stared at the screen for a long time. Then I replied, I could use help watching Ellie this weekend. I have work. Her response came immediately. Of course. Anytime. For the first time in a long time. I didn't feel like I was floating alone. That night, Ellie and I made pancakes for dinner. She wore her bunny slippers, and I let her pour the syrup herself, even though she made a mess. As we sat at the table, she looked up and asked, Are you happy now? Mommy. I looked at her sticky face, her wide eyes, her open heart. I'm getting there. I said, one day at a time. She nodded like she understood. And maybe she did. Because children always see the truth, even when adults try to bury it. The verdict came on a Wednesday. A quiet one, clouds hanging low but not threatening rain, as if the sky itself was holding its breath. I arrived early, not because I wanted to, but because I couldn't stand sitting at home pretending to do anything else. Courtrooms always smell the same, like dust, paper, and air conditioning. I sat in the second row this time, not behind a pillar, not tucked into the margins. Marla sat beside me, calm, composed, her pen tapping a silent rhythm against her folder. He wasn't there yet. His attorney arrived alone at first. Then 10 minutes before the session began, he walked in. No tie again. Hair slightly disheveled this time. His eyes swept the room and stopped on me, but only for a second, then moved on. Good. I didn't need apologies. I didn't need a final look. I didn't want closure. I wanted the record to speak. The judge entered and we all rose. The room settled. And then, in the silence that followed, the clerk stood to read the findings on the matter of domestic abuse as presented through testimonial and audio evidence. The court finds in favor of the petitioner, Mara Jennings. I exhaled. No cheer, no applause, just silence, heavy, sacred, like the closing of a long, painful book. Further statements followed, protective orders extended, mandatory counseling recommendations for him, a custody reassessment. Each word etched into the air like slow-moving ink. But I only heard the first sentence. Over and over, the court finds in favor of the petitioner. That was me. When the judge dismissed us, people rose slowly, almost unsure if it was truly over. I stood last. My legs weren't trembling. They were grounded, firm. I walked past him in the aisle. He looked down at his shoes. For once, no attempt to spin a story. No parting line meant to wound me in private. It was over. Outside the courthouse, the air was warm. The clouds were thinning. I took out my phone and called Ellie's school. Can I speak to the front desk? I need to leave a message for my daughter's class. The secretary put me on hold, then came back with a cheerful, Go ahead. I paused, then said, Just tell her Mommy did the brave thing, and we can have pancakes again tonight. When I hung up, I didn't cry. I walked to my car, opened the trunk, and took out a small box I'd brought that morning. It held his old house keys, an old cell phone charger, and a folded letter I'd written to him but never sent. I walked across the street to the public trash bin and dropped it in. It made no sound, but it felt like thunder. Later that evening, I sat on the living room floor with Ellie while she built a Lego castle. Do you think dragons are real? She asked. I think some used to be, I replied. What happened to them? They got too big, I said softly. They started hurting the wrong people, so someone had to stop them. She looked up, thoughtful. Did they have swords? Not always, I said. Sometimes they just had the truth. She nodded, satisfied. That weekend, I took her to the lake, just the two of us. We packed peanut butter sandwiches, a blanket, and a pair of cheap sunglasses shaped like stars. At one point, she ran to the water, shouting, "Watch me skip," and I watched her splash through the shallows, arms out, fearless. A woman nearby, sitting alone on a bench, looked over and smiled. Your daughter, she asked. I nodded. She's got a strong spirit, the woman said. Yeah, I said, my voice soft. She gets it from someone who had to learn the hard way. The woman didn't ask more. She just nodded in the way women sometimes do when they recognize a story they've lived some version of themselves. A week passed, then 2. Court became a memory. People stopped texting. Life, as it always does, moved on. But I hadn't forgotten. One evening, I pulled out the recordings, not to relive them, but to delete them. I sat at the kitchen table, phone in hand, finger hovering over the delete icon. Then I paused. I transferred them instead, onto a flash drive. I labeled it with a single word proof, not because I needed it anymore, but because someone else might. Someday. In the months that followed, I started sleeping through the night. The bags under my eyes faded. Ellie's drawings became brighter. One morning she handed me a picture, a house with a rainbow over it, a small girl with curly hair holding hands with a taller woman. We're not sad anymore, she said. No, I replied. We're not. But some nights, when the wind brushed against the window just right, I'd still flinch. Not out of fear, out of habit. Healing isn't loud. It's the absence of certain noises, the silence where shouting used to be. It's standing in your kitchen and realizing your shoulders are no longer tight, that your breath moves easily, that you're no longer scared of the door opening. One evening, I found a voicemail on my phone. It was from his mother. I didn't know. About everything. I'm sorry. That was all she said. I didn't call back, but I saved it. Not out of sentiment, but because even apologies, when real, are a kind of proof. Not for court. For the soul. And I wanted to believe that somewhere deep down, something in her had shifted too. That silence didn't mean blindness anymore. That maybe Ellie would grow up in a world just a little less complicit. The night of her 7th birthday, I tucked her in and sat on the edge of her bed. You know how proud I am of you, I asked. She nodded, already sleepy. You're brave too, Mommy. I smiled. Maybe, I whispered, but only because of you. She closed her eyes. Can we have pancakes in the morning? Always, I said. And I meant it. Fall came quietly that year. The leaves turned slower than usual, as if even the trees weren't quite sure how to let go. I found myself watching the light change in the mornings, how it filtered through the kitchen window and warmed the floorboards. There was a stillness in those moments, a kind of peace I hadn't known in years, not dramatic, not overwhelming, just normal. That word used to sound like a consolation prize. Now it felt like luxury. I started getting used to the silence in the apartment. Not the silence of fear, but the kind where you could actually hear your own thoughts. I learned that Ellie hummed when she colored, that the refrigerator had a tiny buzz I'd never noticed, that I didn't grind my teeth at night anymore. On Saturdays, we went to the farmer's market. I'd let Ellie pick out fruit even when she grabbed underripe pears or bruised apples. We were learning together how to choose gently, How to Live in the Open. One morning, while she was at school, I got a call from the County Outreach Center. "Hi, is this Mara Jennings?" a woman asked. "Yes. Speaking. This is Carla from the Domestic Advocacy Network. One of the legal clerks forwarded your case. We're running a training seminar next month, and we're wondering if you'd be willing to speak." I paused. To professionals, I asked. To young women. She said gently. Most of them are coming out of similar situations. Some are staying in shelters. Others are just starting court proceedings. We thought your story might help. Help. That word sat in my mouth like a stone. For so long, I'd been the one needing help. Now someone thought I was help. I told her I'd think about it. After hanging up, I sat in the middle of the living room floor. I stared at the ceiling and remembered the worst nights. The trembling. The way I used to hold my phone under the covers, pressing record in case something happened. Just in case no one believed me later. I hadn't planned to tell my story to anyone outside the courtroom. It was something I had buried in court transcripts and sealed audio files. But maybe it didn't have to stay buried. A week later, I stood in a community center gymnasium, fluorescent lights, folding chairs, cheap coffee in styrofoam cups, and 24 women watching me, most of them younger than me, some with children at their side. I introduced myself the same way I had in court. I'm Mara Jennings, 34, paralegal, single mom. I told them about the envelope I used to carry, about the recordings, about the silence I endured not just from him, but from everyone around us. I didn't cry. Neither did they. One woman raised her hand. "Did you ever regret staying so long?" I took a breath. "Every day," I said. And also, no. They looked confused. I regret the time I lost, the parts of myself I gave up. But I don't regret surviving. And I don't regret the woman I became because of it. I wouldn't have known I could be this strong. I wouldn't have known what love really isn't. Another woman said quietly, "I think I'm still in it. I don't know how to get out." I didn't try to fix her. I didn't say you can do it or be brave. I just nodded. Then let this be the beginning. I said, not the end. Afterward. Several came up to thank me. One handed me a note scribbled on the back of a grocery list. "You said it out loud. That means I can too." I carried that scrap in my wallet for weeks. One night, Ellie found it. "What's this?" I smiled. A reminder of what that being honest can help other people. She considered that, then went back to her coloring book. A few weeks later, I ran into his sister. It was at the pharmacy. I was picking up cold medicine. She was in line ahead of me, flipping through a magazine. When she saw me, she froze. I could see it on her face, that brief flash of shame followed by the reflexive mask she always wore. She stepped aside, as if to let me go ahead. I didn't. I just looked at her, not with anger, not with anything really. She said, "I didn't know. I mean, I thought, but he always said. I repeated, "I know." She stared at the floor. "I'm sorry," she whispered. I nodded. "Thank you." Then I paid for the medicine and walked out. I didn't feel triumphant, just tired, but lighter. That night, I dreamt of a house with open windows. No locks, just curtains blowing in the wind. I woke up with the feeling of sunlight on my skin. There are some moments no one claps for. No audience, no headlines. But they matter. Like the day Ellie brought home a drawing from school. It was labeled "My Family," 3 figures: me, her, and our cat. Buttons. She had drawn herself in the middle, holding both of our hands. The teacher had written in the corner, "Ellie said she feels safe at home." I stuck it on the fridge. It stayed there for months. That drawing meant more than any court ruling ever could. Safety isn't a verdict, it's a lived experience. A quiet morning, a laugh without flinching, a child who draws love without needing to hide anything. Winter came early that year. The first frost settled over the windows in thin white veins, and Ellie pressed her fingers against the glass each morning, fascinated by the way her warmth erased the cold in patches. She called it drawing with my hands. I let her. After years of walking on eggshells, I wasn't about to scold her for leaving fingerprints. We got used to rituals. Simple ones. Pancakes on Sundays, story time on Tuesdays, quiet evenings with hot cocoa and mismatched socks. The world outside kept moving hectic and sharp and fast, but inside our apartment, time softened. Ellie started sleeping through the night. So did I. And one morning, after I dropped her off at school, I drove past our old building. I hadn't meant to. It just happened. The route came back to me without thought, like muscle memory I hadn't consented to. I slowed at the intersection and looked up at the balcony where I once stood holding my phone, heart pounding, recording his voice through the cracked window. It looked so small now. The balcony, the building, the life I used to think I couldn't escape. I didn't stop the car. I didn't get out. I just stared for a long moment and whispered, "Never again." And then I kept driving. That night, I got a message from someone I hadn't spoken to since the trial, a former friend, if you could even call her that. Her name was Dana. She used to come over for wine nights back when Ellie was a toddler, back when I still wore concealer like armor and laughed too loudly so no one would ask about the bruises. Her message was short. "I owe you an apology. I should have said something. I saw things. I just didn't want to get involved." I stared at the screen for a long time. Part of me wanted to delete it. Part of me wanted to write back and ask, why now? Why only after everything's over? But I didn't do either. I simply replied, "You still can say something, just not to me. Say it to someone who's where I was." I never heard from her again. But that was okay. That wasn't why I wrote it. Weeks passed, then months, and slowly, I let more people in. Not all at once, not with the full story, just in pieces. Safe, manageable ones. I met a woman named Jasmine at one of the advocacy meetings. She was tall, soft-spoken, wore her trauma like an elegant scarf present, but not begging for attention. We started getting coffee after each session. She never asked too much. She just let me speak when I wanted to, and I did the same for her. She was the first person I told about the hallway fight, the one that wasn't recorded. The one where I'd blocked him from Ellie's room and he shoved me so hard I hit the wall and slid down it like a dropped coat. She closed her eyes when I told her, just sat with it. No gasps, no pity. And when I finished, she said, "I believe you. Even if you hadn't recorded anything, I would have believed you." I didn't know how much I needed that. It's strange how you can leave a situation, rebuild your life, and still carry the hunger for belief, like a splinter in the soul. Sometime in February, Ellie asked about her father. We were at the library, checking out books. She chose one about planets. She always liked things bigger than herself: oceans, stars, volcanoes. She turned to me and said, "Will Daddy ever take me to space?" I froze. She hadn't mentioned him in months, maybe even a year. "I don't think so," I said gently. "Why not?" I closed the book and knelt down beside her. "Because Daddy's not part of our adventures anymore," I said. "Some people don't know how to keep others safe, and when someone doesn't know how to be kind, it's better to love them from far away." She nodded, serious, like Pluto. Exactly like Pluto. And that was the end of it. That night. I cried in the shower, not because I missed him, but because it was the first time I had to translate pain into a version safe enough for a child's heart to carry, and it felt like cutting the truth into paper shapes. Spring arrived with a kind of hush. No fanfare, just slightly longer days, buds on branches, Ellie outgrowing her shoes again. I started reading again. Real books. Not articles about court rulings or trauma recovery. Fiction. Poetry. Things with no function but beauty. And one evening, I found myself writing, not a journal entry, not a statement, just a paragraph about a woman standing in a quiet house, listening to her daughter's laughter through an open window, knowing for the first time in years that nothing would interrupt it. It was short, maybe 300 words, but it was mine. A few weeks later, I shared it with Jasmine. She smiled and said, "You know, that sounds like the beginning of something," and maybe it was. I started carving out time to write. Mornings, mostly. Before Ellie woke up, I'd sit with a cup of coffee and my laptop and just let my mind wander. Sometimes it wandered back, but more and more, it wandered forward, to stories about women who survived, women who left, women who were believed. Eventually, I sent one of them to an online magazine. I didn't expect anything, but 3 weeks later, I got an email with the subject line, "We'd love to publish your piece." I stared at it in disbelief. It wasn't about him. It wasn't even about me. Exactly. It was fiction. But the bones of it were born from truth, from survival, from the quiet knowing that sometimes the most radical thing you can do is speak. I told no one at first. Not even Marla. Not even Jasmine. But when it went live, I read it to Ellie. She sat on the couch, chin in her hands, eyes wide. "Did you write this?" she asked. I did. "It's really good, Mommy." And that was the best review I'd ever get. It was a Tuesday when I received the letter from the court. The envelope was plain, government issued, the kind you recognize, without reading. I held it in my hand for a moment before opening it, letting the paper speak its quiet tension before I peeled the seal. Inside was the final custody ruling, full guardianship, no shared decision-making, no weekend handoffs, no split holidays or midnight calls from lawyers. Final. That word echoed louder than I expected. It didn't sound like revenge. It sounded like rest. I sat at the kitchen table and stared at it. Not out of disbelief, but because there was no one left I needed to show it to. Not the judge, not his family, not the jury, not the old friends who ghosted me when things got uncomfortable. This was mine. Ellie came in from school that afternoon dragging her backpack and a daisy she'd picked from the neighbor's garden. "I got in trouble," she said, holding it up. I raised an eyebrow. "For stealing beauty." She giggled. "Ms. Loretta made me promise not to pick more, but she let me keep this one." I took the flower and set it in a glass of water on the windowsill. She looked up at me and asked, "Can we go somewhere this weekend? Just us, where do you want to go?" She thought for a second. "Somewhere quiet, where we can yell if we want." I smiled. "That's a special kind of quiet." We went to the coast, rented a cheap cabin with creaky floors and windows that opened too easily. There were no screens on the doors, so bugs got in at night, and the tap water tasted like metal. But Ellie loved it. We brought marshmallows and a flashlight and stayed up late on the porch. She asked if we could sleep outside, and I said yes. Even though I knew we'd both come back inside before midnight, it wasn't about the camping. It was about saying yes. She laid beside me under a too-thin blanket, her tiny hand tucked into mine. I looked up at the stars and thought about all the nights I had once spent wide-awake, heart-racing. Muscles tense, ears straining for slammed doors or broken glass. Now, All I heard was crickets, the rustle of trees. I'd never known peace could be so quiet. In the morning, we made toast over the stove and used jam straight from the jar. Ellie's hair stuck up in every direction. She looked at me over the rim of her mug and said, "This is the best day ever." It was the kind of moment you don't write down until later. You just live it. You breathe it in and let it settle in your ribs. A few days after we returned, I received an email from a woman named Clara, someone I didn't know. She'd read my story in the magazine. Her words were simple. "I'm still in it. Thank you for making me feel less alone." I replied. And from there, something began. More emails, more names, more women, some anonymous, some ready to share their own stories. A few asked how to start collecting evidence. A few asked how to leave. I didn't have all the answers. I didn't pretend to. I just told them the truth, that it hurts, that it's terrifying, that people won't believe you at first, or they'll believe you quietly, but say nothing, that you'll doubt yourself even when the bruises are real. But I told them something else too. It gets better. Slowly, in ways you can't measure, in mornings where no one slams a door, in daughters who sleep soundly, in laughter that doesn't have to hide. I kept writing, not just for me anymore, for them, for the woman I used to be, for the ones still trying to find their voice. I wrote about silence, and how it isn't always peace. I wrote about love, and how sometimes it looks like safety, and sometimes it looks like leaving. I wrote about Ellie, her bravery, her resilience, the way she asked hard questions and never looked away. One morning, while folding laundry, I found her drawing again, the one with the rainbow and the three of us, her, me, and the cat. She had added something new, a sun, just above our heads, a big golden circle with long crayon rays reaching out in all directions. It felt right. We weren't just surviving anymore. We were growing things, making light, laughing in rooms that used to echo with fear. Ellie still asked about him sometimes, not often, but when she did, it was with curiosity, not pain. "Do you think he misses us?" she asked one evening while brushing her teeth. "I don't know," I said honestly, "but I know we're okay." "Yeah," she said, "we are." That night, she fell asleep with her head on my chest. I stayed there a while, listening to her breathing. There wasn't a single moment I could point to and say, "This is where it all turned around." Healing came in waves, in stillness, in the sound of her breath syncing with mine, and in the truth I could finally carry without shame. I wasn't overreacting. I wasn't imagining it. I wasn't crazy. I was surviving something I shouldn't have had to survive. And in the end, I told the truth. Not for them, for me, and for Ellie.